All right, we're going to get started in just a couple. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I call the April 19th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are a public hearing on outdoor dining code amendments and a study session on the comprehensive plan update. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. The City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those who are participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. Public comment and hearing testimony will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may make comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell City Notice, City website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. A video of this meeting will be streamed live, as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone and listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone can follow along. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our attendees. And I buried my list. Commissioner Kurd is on his way in some traffic, so we expect him. Commissioner Westerbeck?
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson?
Here.
Commissioner Jones?
Here.
Commissioner Anders, I'm sorry. Oops, you muted.
I'm here.
Good to hear from you. And Commissioner Robson?
Present.
All right, so all commissions are present or otherwise accounted for. We also have in attendance Community Development Director Ashley Winchell, Senior Planner Kirsten Mant, Community Involvement Sarah Frost, and Spacing.
Deputy Director
Steve Marakawa. So thank you all for being here. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines for all meeting attendees. Please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. At specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand, either virtually via Zoom or in person, and this will help avoid the problem of having two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, or second a motion, or participate in debate. And please mute your microphone when not speaking. So the first item on our agenda is public comment. The city accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to commissioners and are part of the record, and I believe we have not received any written comments today. Is that correct?
Correct. There are no written comments.
All right. I believe we do have some individuals in the audience who'd like to make a public comment, and I'd welcome you at this time to step up to the podium, push the little button so the light goes on your microphone, and identify yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes. Right here.
Here you go. Thank you. Okay.
Good evening. I will probably present this again when the planning committee meets. Okay. My name is Lucy Antonio, and I have lived in downtown Bothell for over 20 years. My home is on 186th Street, and it is 85 years old. I've been working very hard on keeping it in a very nice condition. I am opposed to the changing the code and the amendments that the planning committee are proposing. I read all of these 30-plus letters that were published in the April 5th agenda. Not one agreed with your proposal. I have also contacted people in many neighborhoods. I work at Maywood Hills Elementary, and I've spoken to many diverse neighbors there and let them know what you are planning or what is being planned as far as the new zoning requirements. The Planning Committee's proposals include the reduction of setbacks from 25 feet to 15 feet, a 5-story or 55-foot building height, and inefficient parking. We will all suffer from the effects of the additional traffic, we will all suffer from the effects of the additional traffic in existing roads that are not up to handling more traffic. There's also the points of the lack of sunlight and air, light pollution at night, and the devaluation of our homes. I represent the 186th Street residents. We have some other people here from our neighborhood. This is the second time of appealing to you. We saved our neighborhood in 2018, and we ask again that you stop this careless overbuilding of Bothell. When is enough enough? Finally, I challenge you, the Bothell Planning Committee and the Bothell City Council, to take a walk in downtown Redmond, in downtown Linwood, in Northgate, in Lake City. These are soulless communities with tall buildings, no light, and no human interaction. And if you are not thoughtful and committed to Bothell and its citizens, that is where we will be going in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Others?
Good evening. I'm James Caniff. I'd like everybody to turn to page 57 of 89 of the vision statement of Bothell. In the first little dot, it says, "We believe the essence of a prosperous, vibrant city is found not in its structure, but its collective spirits of those who live within Bothell." I've lived in Bothell over 20 years. If you look at the people who live by the post office and they built the 104 building, the houses behind the 104 were shaded. They were forced to sell so they could build another apartment. And that's kind of what you're doing to us. If you put apartments in front of us, we'll be forced to sell because we're in the shade. We already live on 186. I live behind the addition apartments that are on 185th. All our houses have moss on the roofs. The street on this side of City Hall that's shaded is full of moss and green. The same on the addition side. You guys don't pressure wash or keep up the streets so they're green. Take a walk down the side of your building out here when you get off. See how the sidewalk looks. We have people who live in Bothell. I've lived in Bothell a long time. And I don't want to be shaded out because you want to rezone to 5 stories. 3 stories of where it's at right now is fine. I feel like if you're the commission, it should be about the people in Bothell, the small community people, the people who support you guys, not about big business or raising property tax revenue from getting more apartments. Basically, look at what big apartments are doing to this Bothell area already. Take a walk from the post office or from City Hall down to the new fire station and look at the sidewalks where it's shaded. Take the time out of your busy schedules to look at what's happening to Bothell, get it shaded away this way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Thank you. Seeing none, thank you for taking the time to come in, put your comments on record. The downtown zoning amendments will be heard later, I think late May. They're on the schedule. So you might watch for that notice. Absolutely. On the agendas, they do say you can submit right at the top of your agenda if you've got it there. It says you can submit either orally or in writing. And comments which are submitted in writing become part of the public record. They are provided to the commissioners. If you get them in before 3 p.m. the day of the meeting, we'll receive them before the meeting. Otherwise, they're appended and will come in later. All right. Okay. Thank you all. Commissioner Curd, welcome.
Thank you.
And were there any Zoom commenters?
There are no attendees on Zoom.
All right, seeing none, we will proceed. Our next item is approval of the minutes. We have before us the minutes of the April 5th meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Curd.
This is Carson. I move to approve the meeting minutes from April 5th.
It has been moved to approve the minutes from the April 5th meeting. Is there a second?
Second, Jones.
Okay, Commissioner Jones has second. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Looking back and forth at the commissioners, seeing no indication thereof. All in favor of adopting the minutes of the April 5th meeting, please indicate by saying aye.
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 All right, we have all of us unanimous to adopt those minutes, so thank you all. Next item on our agenda is new business. Commissioner Anders. Oops, still can't hear you. Having a volume problem. You're calling in? Okay.
I'm not seeing the number showing up in the attendees yet.
Yeah, you need to call in and enter the number. Do you have that information? I'm looking at our deputy director, and she is.
Yes, it's 253-215-8782. That's the number you're calling? And it's not prompting you to put in a number after that?
Yes.
Okay.
We're
I'm-
still working through Zoom after all this time.
Commissioner Anders, if there's something you want to communicate to the commission, you could send me an email and I could read it to them. I don't think you can chat me.
Yeah, we did disable the chat function.
I'm also kind of good at reading lips. Okay.
Well, for those listening, we're pausing to work through a technical matter. Hopefully it will not be too long. That's fine, I think I saw. All right, we'll proceed, and if you try to log in via phone, Deputy Director Winchell will keep monitoring that to see if it pops up. So with that, we'll resume our agenda. We are on new business. Do we have any new business?
No new business.
All right, no new business at this point. We will then move on to the public hearing on the outdoor dining code amendments. And Senior Planner Mant, are you leading us through that? All right.
So you should all have in your packet a copy of the findings as well as the proposed code changes. and a copy of the SEPA checklist. You'll see that the amendments proposed should be pretty much what you saw in March, save for some of those adjustments that we discussed at the time that were just some kind of fixes. I did want to give a chance to give some feedback from some of the questions I heard, so I was going to follow up on that with you all. We did get a chance to speak with our Economic Development Manager, Jeannie Ash, about potential interest from other businesses, some in the parks. She noted a few shopping centers that have done kind of more on a temporary basis, some outdoor dining and some special events, but we haven't really gotten any requests for more permanent structures from them, so that could be something in the future that comes up and we can figure that out at the time. And those tend to need a pre-approval as well, so those get evaluated on their own. Regarding some of the ADA discussion, I did have a discussion with our deputy city attorney, and he recommended that it would be best practice to not include ADA requirements in the code because it's kind of a separate thing that gets evaluated through the building division. The other complication from that is anytime we're adding in code from outside of our code, anytime that changes, we need to make sure we're updating it to be consistent. That could become a bit of an issue to try and keep up with. One thing we did talk about last time that I think would be a good practice is to add a line item on the checklist to make sure that when we are taking in those permit applications, we're requiring that they show that ADA compliance so that we can review that as part of the package. So that would be a recommendation from us. And then I also spoke with Janet Gear from our Surface Water Division about some of the questions about potential issues with the storm system. She said that she confirmed that there is language in Title 18 about how cleaning can occur. So there's pressure washing and similar types of cleaning. They just can't use chemicals. We don't have any kind of an inspection process for that. It's sort of on a reporting basis like most of our code compliance. And if someone would be found to be out of compliance, they would have a stop work order. We would have our inspectors come out. They would be required to clean the storm system, and there would be a potential fine. So we do have some checks and balances on some of that cleaning stuff. So those are the updates I have from the study session. And that's about what I have for the presentation since we did go through all of the code proposals at the study session, and it should be about the same, except for some of those tweaks.
All right, commissioners, questions or comments? So I think you addressed the questions that were in the written comment in the package from Ms. Harkonnen.
Yes, I emailed her directly, and that email came in the day of the last study session. I did not receive any further comment from her.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I propose that, commissioners, if you have any questions or comments on the code amendments, now would be the time, and then we'd close with the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. We want to focus on the changes, the underlying strikeout. So have y'all had an opportunity to review that? Any questions? Give everyone a minute. I'm seeing heads shaking. All right, then with that, we're going to accept the amendments as proposed, seeing as there are no comments coming. Now let's look at the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. First 5 items are pretty factual boilerplate, so I'd assume that there are no comments to that. If you'd like to look at item 6, it addresses our findings. And again, I'll look to see if there are any comments on item 6, which specifically talks to various issues associated with this. Looking back and forth and seeing no comments. Everyone comfortable with that? All right. As we heard, Department of Commerce has been sent these, and the SEPA checklist was attached. I know at least 1 or 2 of us reviewed the SEPA checklist in detail.
I'm very glad.
Some of us have written them.
I'm sorry you had to do that. I never see another one. I will not be sad.
So with that, the conclusions, and they're fairly brief, so I'll read through them. Code amendments have been drafted, noticed, reviewed by the public, and considered by the Planning Commission in accordance with laws, State of Washington and City of Bothell. Second, the outdoor dining code amendments are necessary to permit the continued use of outdoor dining facilities as permitted under the interim ordinance. Also necessary to meet the directive of interim ordinance 2372 to draft permanent regulations. This will provide those permanent regulations. Third item, these outdoor code amendments do not impact the allowance for outdoor dining facilities on Main Street with movable bollards that allow dining facilities in on-street areas, as these spaces were designed and built to be used as outdoor dining facilities under the downtown sub-area plan. And finally, the downtown code amendments are in the best interest of public health, safety, and welfare. So based on these findings and conclusions and the entire record, the Planning Commission recommends the council adopt. I think you need adopt in there. Do you drop a word? Recommends the council adopt the proposed.
That is correct.
Okay. So there might be a motion to amend the conclusions when we get there. Adopt the outdoor dining code amendments as Exhibit A to these findings, conclusions, and recommendations. So is there a motion to adopt the findings, conclusions, and recommendations? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Commissioner Westerbeck here. I propose we adopt the findings, conclusions, and recommendations as written.
Is there a second? Yes.
Sarah Gustafson here. I second the motion.
All right. Discussion around that motion and perhaps an amendment to add the word adopt.
I would also propose an amendment on page 6. I noticed a typo. The public hearing is today and not on the 29th.
Ooh, okay.
So I will fix that as well.
And then before you all adopt the findings, and my memory might be wrong on this, but we haven't taken public comment.
Okay, no, we have not. I'm sorry. So we are in a public hearing on these proposed code amendments. Are there any comments to the amendments? Anyone in the audience wish to comment on them? We're both for it. There are members of the audience. They don't wish to speak, but they do not. You could just stand up, say you support it, and we can move on. Yes, just identify yourself and state.
My name is Matt Quest. I'm the owner of the cottage across the street, and we are very much in favor of the proposed amendment.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anyone on Zoom seeking to comment?
There are no attendees on Zoom.
No attendees on Zoom still? No late tune-ins, huh? So seeing no other comments, I'll close the public hearing. So we do have a motion. Should we remake that motion, or can we just pick it up where we left off?
I think you could just pick it up where you left off.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to adopt the findings, conclusions, and recommendations as amended with the date and a word addition. Any further discussion on those? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the findings, conclusions, and recommendations of the proposed code amendments regarding outdoor dining?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, it is unanimous. So the commission adopts and recommends to the council the outdoor dining code amendments. Thank you all. And so next stop, council. With that, we'll move on to our next item, which is a study session on the comprehensive plan update. So would you like to lead us on that?
Sure. And it will be, I'll also be joined by Sarah Frost, our community engagement specialist, who will help me to speak on the community engagement strategy.
Let me ask a quick question. Commissioner Anders, you can hear us, is that right?
was working at the beginning.
I just wanted to make sure that at least you could hear, even if we can't hear you. So wonderful.
And
I figured you probably could, but fair thing.
we got her phone in, so she should be able to speak.
Oh, good.
But I think she has to press, I can't remember what you have to press on your phone to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Problem solved.
I can
Sorry,
look it up
just
and let
checking.
you know.
Oh, and I think you need to make me a presenter so I can share my screen. Oh, now I can.
I'll just add real quick before we get started that if you want to unmute, you press *6.
All right. So there are a few topics we were going to cover tonight on more of just a presentation basis. So I was going to discuss those first and then get into a study session about the existing vision statement and some of the options for how we could think about potentially formatting it a little bit differently moving forward and some of the contents of that. So I wanted to give an update on the climate change element and the status of the work on that. That's going to be the first element completed given the timelines required for our grant. So working with our consultant Burke, the first part for them is the sort of analysis component. So there's 3 buckets of assessments that they're working on right now. One is looking at our existing natural environment element, which has the only climate change policies we currently have, evaluating that against the Department of Commerce's model climate element. It's largely consistent with the recent bill that was passed related to climate change elements, but we will also be obviously confirming that in the legislation. The second component of that is an equity assessment. This is in addition to our overall racial equity assessment and toolkit. And the main goal here is to identify who the most vulnerable populations are and the most vulnerable lands, and so where some of our efforts should be focused in developing policy. And then finally, an economic assessment. So that's going to be looking at the relative costs and benefits of different implementation strategies that we might consider adopting. And then the big piece is drafting the actual element itself. Again, we do need to have a draft by June, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to revise that, take a look at it as over the course of the process. We just need a draft by June. And those 3 assessments are really going to be a big part of putting together the draft plan and making sure that it's at least in a really good working space by June. And then the second component to that is obviously presenting that to our working groups that we'll be putting together through our community engagement process, as well as sharing with the community over the summer, especially during a lot of those outreach events, and then with you folks, and then with council. So that's kind of the short and sweet update on the climate change plan. It's a lot of early work right now, so we don't have a lot of more concrete stuff to share. I think we're hoping to come back in June, potentially late May, with a little bit more once we're kind of closer to having that draft to show you what we put together by then. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about our finalized community engagement strategy.
So this is pretty exciting. The community engagement strategy is included. Oh, do I need to be closer? Okay, there we go. You all have a copy of the community engagement strategy. This is our sort of final working document. So it will change and flux, and some things won't be exactly precise, but this is the goal. This is the idea. The purpose of the engagement is threefold. It's to inform the public, the community, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what those different components are, like the climate change element, for instance. Then we consult with them. That's the working groups, those the outreach, some of those survey sort of components, and we collaborate. And so this is our stakeholders, our community groups that we'll be working with, those same working groups, to sort of really dig into some of those ideas of what the community wants to see with this comp plan, what those ideas are. So some 2 key phases. We have the early determination of the guiding principles and the plan blueprint, which Senior Planner Mant will be talking about a little bit more later. And then the sort of second component of that is taking the blueprint and then taking it and creating those drafts. So taking what we heard from the community and putting it into the actual comprehensive plan. So methods of engagement, we already talked about the summer events, utilizing those public outreach forums like community events that are already happening. We have online engagement. This is in the form of social media, email, news blasts. We'll also be doing the engagement portal, which is in progress. It's exciting. We plan on having surveys throughout the process on different components, whether it's a specific targeted topic or whether it's overall. We have the legislative process for Planning Commission and Council. And then at the end, we're going to wrap it all up with a community celebration to say, hey, look, we did it. It's exciting. Yeah.
So I did want to spend some time before discussion to give kind of an overview, because sometimes even for planners, it gets confusing, the differentiation between what is a goal, what is a policy, what is an action. So I really wanted to spend some time kind of going over best practices for visioning and vision statements or guiding principles, goals, policies, and actions/implementation measures. So what is a vision statement? Again, I have an MRSC quote because I just think they do a really good job at summarizing some of these concepts. And this is from their page on strategic and comprehensive planning. I say a vision statement captures what community members most value about their community and the shared image of what they want their community to become. It inspires community members to work together to achieve the vision. So for me, the most important part of that is really those shared values. What are the shared values of a given community, and how does that feed into what they want to see happen in the future? Goals. So goals should be, what is our desired end result that's going to lead us to the vision? So they should support the vision. They should be written as statements, typically is the best practice, and they should establish an aim or objective under which the policies and implementation measures support. So in our current natural environment element, the first goal is not written quite this way, but if we were to write it as the sort of desired end result, it would be a harmonious relationship between the built and natural environments. So it's general, but it's not super general. It's still getting at this relationship between the built environment and nature, and it will help feed into, okay, if this is our desired end result, how do we get there? So policies I think of as, what are we going to do to achieve our goals that we've put together in support of our vision? So they should generally be active statements that are methods to achieve our stated goals. They can be specific, but they shouldn't be overly specific or prescriptive, because those should feed into some of the implementation components. So a good example is from our natural environment element, sticking with the theme. Our policy 23 currently is protect groundwater recharge areas that benefit anadromous fisheries through the critical areas regulations. So it's kind of nested under that prior goal. You can see the connection, and it's getting more specific, but it's not speaking to a specific action or program. And then implementation. How are we going to execute these policies to achieve the goals? So these can be specific projects or actions. Ideally, they should have success metrics that can be either quantified or qualified, because otherwise, how are you gauging if that was successful or not? How are you gauging if that's actually fulfilling your policy and goals? Again, ideally, if you can tie them to funding and resources, that's really helpful. Typically in like a matrix form can be really common. That's something we've been thinking about, is creating an implementation matrix of, this is an action we want to take, this is either funding or potential funding we can to achieve it, and then this is the metric that we gauged by to see if it was successful. Also, ideally, they're achievable within the planning window. We've talked about doing an implementation plan or strategy. Those usually have shorter windows than the comp plan itself, about 5 years, and that way we can keep that more updated and are making sure we're checking in on those implementation measures and seeing how are we doing, are we getting what we want to, if we're not, how can we adjust? So a good example that I think could be a little bit better, but a current action that we have in the natural environment element is continue participation in regional watershed and salmon recovery planning activities. There's some specific organizations we're involved in regionally that have different activities related to this. I think this could be more specific if we're looking at more of a 5-year window of what specific activities are planned within these regional groups. Let's maybe be more specific about what are those actual activities and how can we become involved and apply them to our waterways. So a couple connected plans and projects I want to bring up that we've just been working to make sure we're consistent with. One being the recently adopted City Council Vision 2040. This is more of sort of a strategic plan with, I think, a 3 to 5 year window, but it obviously has some ties to the comp plan, and we want to make sure that we're consistent with the themes in the vision as well as some of the implementation components that they're looking at doing. So there are sort of 7 main buckets of topics that they have in there, and so we're working to create alignment between the comp plan and the council vision. And then this is a project that we're really excited about. We got some funding to do a project called Telling Bothell's Full Story. It's kind of a history project. Our current plan doesn't have a history component, and we felt it was really important to, as a preamble to the plan, talk about who have we been, who are we now, and who do we want to be through the vision. So this project, we will be working with our historic preservation consultant we really recently brought on to do a really deep dive into the history of Bothell. And some of the things that he's talked about as methods that I think are really exciting are things like oral stories, reaching out to the community. What do people have in their attics? Stuff that we wouldn't otherwise find anywhere else, and really trying to get a really well-rounded and honest appraisal of our history. So that'll be a really cool project that we'll be integrating in there. I threw in some fun pictures I found through just looking through some existing images and texts that were pretty cool to me. So that will be an exciting topic to bring back to you guys when we have some more information. So I think a lot of this summer, we're trying to integrate our consultant in with the engagement work so that as we're out there talking to people, hopefully we can maybe get some people to talk to, some stories. So more to come. And then now I really want to get into formatting options, not even necessarily getting into content. Our current vision, well, first I'll start with the originally adopted vision. So after GMA was passed in 1990, our council initiated the first update for consistency with GMA. And before they even adopted the first updated comp plan, which was in 1995, they adopted a vision in 1991. And as you can see, it looks pretty similar to the 2015 vision statement. Format-wise and actually even content-wise, I went through and made an Excel spreadsheet for myself of like what exactly has changed between the vision statements. And for the most part, they're pretty much the same, which isn't necessarily an issue, but I did want to point out that, largely hasn't really changed since 1991. There's been one added vision statement, I believe it's number 3, that was added in 2015 about sustainability. And for the most part, the rest of it has been some minor textual changes, both in that preamble and then also in the statements themselves. And so talking about different ways to look at formatting the vision, or what we're going to be calling the guiding principles. So one is mostly kind of sticking with where we're at. We could streamline the number of statements. There's currently 19. Some of them are a little bit repetitive. There's, I want to say 4 or 5 that all kind of talk about the natural environment, but don't really get at the meat of either climate change or sustainability in a way that I think we could do a little bit better, have a little bit more of a robust focus. And so kind of focusing those themes better, streamlining some of the language, adjusting some of the wording to kind of make them sound less like goals, and also adding or removing statements to reflect current values, particularly as we've been talking about an emphasis on equity, climate change. Also just updating the language more towards best practices for some of those wordings. So we wouldn't necessarily have to change the format if we don't want, or if you don't feel that strongly about that, and we can just focus on some of the content changes. A second option is to take more of a narrative format approach. Some cities do this where rather than having a list of statements, it's more of a narrative format, so more of kind of a storytelling. And then a third option that I think could be a really great hybrid approach and kind of keeping in sort of the feel of what I think a vision or guiding principles are supposed to be is doing something a little more visual where we can maintain the themes, maintain some of the narrative in the text, but integrate some visuals, integrate photos, a little more color, some iconography to kind of create more of this feel for that vision and future image rather than a heavy sort of text document, sort of setting the stage for the goals and the policies that have to be kind of more textually heavy. So those are the kind of 3 buckets of formats I think would be good, with a preference personally and with staff for the third one.
So would you like feedback on that before you move forward, or do you want to finish?
I just have a little bit more, and then I think we can dive
Okay.
into the chat. I wanted to give a sense of the timeline on this, or what we're hoping to achieve. So in this springtime, I kind of was hoping to get at least a preferred format from commission that we can move forward with to council and the public to say, hey, we're thinking this might be a great approach to rethink how this looks, or we like the way it looks, but we want to make some tweaks. And then over the summertime, we really want to work on affirming the content of values and principles with the public and get a feel for their feelings about the public. And then ideally by the fall, we'll be able to kind of affirm both the content and the format, so we can move forward with using that document to inform the rest of the plan drafts in the fall and the winter. And then this was just a list of kind of the goals for tonight, was discussing these formatting options, reviewing some of the staff feedback on the existing vision statements that are provided in the spreadsheet, and get feedback. So I will open it up.
All right, thank you for that presentation. So I will look to the commissioners. You want to start with the first one regarding formatting? Comments on formatting preferences?
Am I on now?
We can hear you.
I just wanted to say, I like the visual with text, because you have no idea how much stuff you're actually reading if you're distracted by nice pictures, or it'll make you want to read. I just think about, when you travel through a museum or a zoo, there's a picture and something to read. Everybody's gonna, or most people will read it because they want to know if it's related to the picture, and it's also distracting, and it's pretty, and it's inviting. I mean, I read a lot of text all the time anyway, but I think it would help, and it makes it more visually interesting.
Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Jones.
I agree with Commissioner Anders. I had one question about the visual, though. How is it going to be accessible? Is it going to be accessible? Some with PDF formats, things like that, you can make them accessible, especially on the web. Can you do that with a visual format like that?
You mean in terms of like ADA compliance?
Correct.
Or I think Sarah's a bit more of an expert on that than me.
And if not, we will find a way to make sure that that's being considered, because that is an equity thing. So I don't know exactly how to do it, but if we can't, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of context with like colors.
Yeah.
And making sure that it's actually able to be visually received by everybody.
Okay, other comments? Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I want to make a note when it comes to ADA compliant. I think Commissioner Jones was also talking about, for example, people who are blind. Would there be additional context on what the pictures are? Because we certainly, focusing on different colors and things so that it's easier for people to see. But for people who can't see at all, or even for people who may want to look at it but don't have a really fast computer speed, and images take longer to download than pictures, or than text sometimes, or making photocopies or things like that, so that everybody has access to it with relative ease. I love the look of the visual, the images, but I do think it's really important that we're articulating what those images mean. I got a little bit, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the comedic, it's like a skit of just images and just trying to sell something, but you don't know what they're selling. They're just like, here's a picture of a flag and people rolling up their sleeves and we're all in this together. And then they're like, let's do it together. And there's no, by the end of the commercial, by the end of the skit, you have no idea what you're being sold, but you're totally on board with it. And I want to avoid that. I feel like we should probably lean a little bit more towards like specifics. Maybe not 19 points. That does sound, I definitely think we need to streamline, but having, and I think it was San Jose, the one you used as an example. I like the way they did it, where they had the blocks with text in them, and colored blocks. That was good. That's certainly engaging with a few images. And then we'd have to figure out how people who are reading it through a computer might need some, some accessory access points.
Yeah, and that's something we can definitely talk about with our consultant, especially when we consider what even format we want to provide the plan in online, if that's just a PDF. One of the example plans I provided has a kind of a cool flipbook format online that's much more interactive that probably be easier to integrate some of that accessibility component. So that's definitely something we can take to our consultant team and discuss how best to do that.
Other commissioners?
I have a question.
Yes.
Commissioner Anders, are we limited to one format? If we choose a format that we all love, can we like do it in PDF in case folks, just want to take it with them or?
Yeah, typically and I think it's the Greensboro example, they have both. So you can do the online one where you're just kind of flipping through and it's kind of that interactive version, which is a little bit easier to click around, but then you can also just download the whole document as a PDF as well. So multiple options.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks, Commissioner Westerbeck here. I just will concur with what I've heard so far. I love the visual. I also agree, obviously accessibility is really important, and the images chosen, I mean, if you only have a handful of images, they're going to have to really be curated to be like, it's just for those people who are seeing it, it's just the image we want to convey. And then I noticed, in the old 19 points is a lot, so I'd love to see, I don't know what the number should be, 10 or 12 or something like that, maybe. I see in your comments, I was reading through the 2015 and the 1991 version, making some notes as I was reading through the packet, and then I see as we get through it, I see your spreadsheet, like, oh, you caught pretty much all the things that I wanted to note, so I love it. Caught those elements as far as some of the changes I would love to see made. But anyway, the 19 there's a lot of them and they're kind of wordy, but they say something. I mean, they get their point across. So this San Jose one, it's pretty concise, and I think we all appreciate that. But as long as we get those points across that we've got in the 2015 version, that's an evolution of the 1991. As long as we can get those points across that we all think should be in the new version, I like that idea a lot. Streamlining. And so I guess concise but thorough. If you can strike the balance of both. Because it seems like we're trying to, at least the past authors, really we're trying to make a point. And it might get a little wordy, which is where it's nice, like Commissioner Anders said, to have something to look at while you're reading all those words.
Yeah, and also the San Jose example has a bit more of a narrative preamble as well.
Okay.
And so we're not necessarily limited to it just being the visual or just being a narrative. We can play around with, well, maybe we want to retain some of those narrative paragraphs in the front, but make the actual statements a little more concise, and maybe nestle them into their themes. Like I think the Richmond example had sort of titled themes, and then they had some points underneath. And those were just some examples that I found on the APA awards page that I thought were kind of good examples of some of that potential ideas that we could pick and choose from and obviously make our own.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more digestible and more appealing as I mean, we have to do it right as Planning Commission and staff and everything, but people who are going to pick this up, we want them to read it and look at it, so making it as appealing as possible. I know images would do that for me, so all for that. Thank you.
Other commissioners? So I would strongly support the consolidation. 19 is a lot, and try to look to remove some of the overlap and duplication. And also kind of picking up on something that was alluded to, be real careful about how fancy we get on our computer stuff, because there are people with less power in their computers, and if you're going to sit there and a page is downloading and downloading, a lot of sites you look at have a light version. So, if necessary, look at that. so you don't lose people through the technology. Okay, so we satisfied on formatting options then? You get feedback you needed on that one?
Mhm.
So reviewing the staff feedback on the existing vision statements.
And I have the Excel spreadsheet I can share. Where did I put it?
Is that what you had in the package?
Yes, I have a PDF form in there, and then I have this Excel. Well, it's not showing that. Why am I paused? I'm gonna stop sharing and reshare so I can get to the right screen. There we go. So I have this in Excel format, so I can just type in notes as we're talking through it, or as people have thoughts, if you've had a chance to look.
And I believe that's page 64 in the package.
Yes.
All right, so you seeking commissioner comments on this? Or do you want to lead, or you want to just take comments?
We could go through one by one, unless people only have thoughts about certain topics. I'll kind of maybe.
Why don't you go through
One by one?
quickly, and then people will.
So for the first one, you can see it's the same as it was in 91. As I noted, it's one of 5 statements I identified that discuss the natural versus the built environment. My suggestion was, I think that it seems like those are maybe ad hoc over time. I know the third was, and it might be good to wrap them all together into kind of one more robust overall statement about the natural environment and climate change and how we feel about that. So that would be a recommendation from staff on how to at least consolidate those 5 into one more robust theme.
So I saw some head nodding and positive feedback on that.
I think,
Commissioner.
Commissioner Anders, to the extent possible, we should consolidate all of them. If we're hitting all the points and there are multiple statements, let's just make one.
Okay. For the second one, I believe the only change I was able to identify was the addition of employment into fostering the fulfillment of human potential through a number of resources. My recommendations would be, I want to maybe clarify, what does it mean for service to just be available to a group? I know that's consistent with more sort of equitable language. Is it actually achievable versus available? And is there also better language we can use for emphasizing equity rather than equality? So again, just kind of updating it for more best practices with equity.
Comments? Excuse me, comments? Should, I guess my question, should, looking at the end of it, all ages, incomes, and ethnic backgrounds, I'm struggling with something about ability.
Okay.
Hitting a diversity of there.
Yeah, I think generally increasing or improving the language about, I think that's what I was trying to get at
Accessibility.
with the equity component, is that there's more than just what we have listed currently that should be considered.
Okay.
Commissioner Anders here. The fosters the fulfillment of human potential part, I get it. It just sounds like a lot, like it's really heavy. I mean, we all understand it, and I'm sure everybody will, but can we just make it a little simpler? The whole thing is just, it's a lot.
It's grandiose.
Yes. Yeah.
I know staff is a fan of pithy language, so we can take a look at that.
Yeah.
Any more thoughts on that one? Okay, we can move on. So number 3 is the only one that was added since 91. This was the one added in 2015. from my understanding, this was the one that was really trying to get more at the climate change component and sustainability. So again, kind of repeating my thoughts or staff thoughts from the first one, I think we can work that into a more robust statement.
Okay, seeing no.
Number 4, I don't think I had any staff comment on this one. It's pretty straightforward, just making sure we have responsive services. It was the same as it was in 91. They just moved where it was.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
This may be totally extraneous. We're now starting to think more about and even pay for or integrate into our city and our region mental health services and social services that we're realizing are as important as fire and EMS and so forth. I don't know that we need to have that in there, but I just want to throw it out there as a consideration if it worked in that, because it's within that sort of umbrella of services they're trying to capture there. I don't know if we update with that in mind or not. Just want to propose it.
Yeah, and we did get feedback from council that they would like to see potentially a separate human services element. We
Okay.
now have it with housing, so that might be a good thing in support of that too, so we can take that into
Okay, it's good to know.
consideration.
Although, back to where Commissioner Westerbeck started, there has been a lot of discussion about integrating a social service response with public safety response. So it might be good to recognize that here.
So Commissioner Jones, you might want to think about phrasing it in terms of behavioral health or something like that, and that aligns with a lot of what's happening regionally. And then the one other comment I had is, where was it? It says through the current statement says through responsive. I wonder if it should say through culturally responsive, right? Because they're, again, going back to the equity issue.
Mm-hmm. And I think when they probably originally wrote that, they might have been referring specifically to like actual response times, because I know that's in our capital facilities element. But I think there's room for changing that when this is the vision. It's not necessarily about technicalities. So something we could definitely discuss.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I do feel like maybe on this one, we're getting a little bit away from the central point here. I'm very much in favor of being culturally responsive and a focus on behavioral health. But I do feel like this one in particular, we should just talk about safety. This one in particular is just the focus on physical safety and security of residents, employees, and visitors through police, fire, and emergency medical aid services. I really like that idea of having a human services, another bullet point for specified to human services. But for example, the difference between a culturally responsive police and fire is very different than just a responsive one, like one that actually, is efficient and effective. And I feel like conflating those two is not going to be real good on a bullet point for one that really, this one's about safety as opposed to, we want to be safe for everybody, as it says, including, which includes cultural responsiveness and mental health issues. But I feel like evoking those specifically would go better in a human services bullet point than essentially safety bullet point.
And this could be a good example of if we're moving towards sort of buckets or topics within the vision, that there could be one just generally about human services and safety, and then keep that delineation between when we're speaking more specifically about technical response times versus the cultural responsiveness or sensitivities of those services as well. So,
Commissioner Anders here, I don't know if my comment goes more to this one or to what Commissioner Robson mentioned, but if we're talking just about response times in this one, if we want to talk about safety and security, we want our emergency personnel to be more than just responsive, but proactive and present and, you know, establishing a sense of community with the folks in the community. So if we're going to add another one in a human services component, we should think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Although we don't want to add too many, 'cause we're downsizing this thing.
Yeah, we removed a few, but we added one now, so. Well, at the risk of getting too far into wordsmithing, you might just say emergency medical and mental health aid services to this one, and you keep the quick responsiveness, but define that as part of the response, and then get to the human services another time.
Commissioner Westerbeck here. I tend to agree with that only, and that, you know, coming back to your point and my point, only because I think, isn't it still integrated with, isn't it one of our new programs like is it Cahoots and Radar and stuff like that, still part of the law enforcement program, but it's a whole separate mental health wing, as it were, or department. So that's the only reason I think, like you're saying, they might stay together. I don't really care where it ends up in the end, but just showing that we're a changing city in that respect somehow.
Watching you write before prompting, so do what you need to do.
Making some notes for myself of things I need to look into where things are housed, because that'll be helpful for our capital facilities element. So if we want to move on to number 5, this was another one of the ones related to the natural environment. This one specifically talking about conservation of scarce natural resources, the actions of residents, businesses, and public institutions. Again, staff feedback would be this could become part of a more robust single statement about the environment and climate change.
Sounds good. I think we concur with that.
For number 6, this one is related to the transportation system. Big change we've started discussing with you is about the level of service update to be more of a people-focused level of service rather than vehicles. So our recommendation would be to revise either the statement or the theme or general statement to more kind of explicitly talk about how we want to prioritize multiple modes of transit rather than just single occupancy vehicles. Another thought that staff had was about what does it mean to maximize individual choice? Trying to think about maybe what was that statement trying to get at, and is that still something that we consider as a value, or is maybe there a better way to say that or more explicit?
Commissioner feedback?
Did we figure out what we meant when we said that?
I could do some digging into the original 1991 adoption.
If we don't know, we could probably just take it out and say something different.
Sure.
I'm sure something was going on in 1991 that
Yes.
made that important.
But I think, I'm not sure we'd want to keep that because not all individual choices can be accommodated, so. All right, next.
Sorry. Number 7, this one, I think my only feedback was some of the potentially coded language. And I know that some of this is being revised through the middle housing comp plan amendments, specifically the next one is being revised, and we're still playing with what the best path forward that will be, and it's going to probably largely be influenced by the racial equity analysis and toolkit they're working on for the middle housing amendments, and that will also be expanding upon for the comp plan. So that's kind of the general feedback for those two, both 7 and 8, looking at revising the language. Again, that language is 32 years old at this point. Is there better language we could use? Specifically on 8, we're pretty much removing, I believe, to the middle housing comp plan proposed amendments references to single family residential and ultimately references to character. but trying to figure out what a better term is still kind of up in the air. So some thoughts on that.
Commissioner Curd?
Thanks. Yeah, in remembering and reading through this one, I do like maybe what they were trying to go for at the end here with accommodations to people that, you know, are the future of Bothell too. So while the vision recognizes our past history and our current state, I do like the focus on the future too. And that could be somewhat of the sustainability component too, but if we're delegating that to its own vision statement, then so be it.
Others? All right, next.
For the next one, looks like there were some good updates for the 2015 one to introduce some additional modes of transit, not just bike and transit oriented, but also walking, and a variety of other transit choices. One of the recommendations staff had was to revise Bothell residents to a more inclusive term that involves also people that work here, people that come here to visit, people that are passing through. So just kind of generally opening up that term to not just residents.
Commissioner Curd?
Thanks. I like that. That's great. I also think that we spent a lot of time on the bike plan talking about all ages and abilities. And so maybe working in accessibility and into these options and choices.
So perhaps multiple accessible transportation modes?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think aligning with some of the language that we used for the bike plan would be a good idea as well. So. For number 10, I think the only feedback I had here was just making sure that the language here is consistent with the goals that we have in our economic development strategy that the council vision is triggering. It is also a fairly lengthy statement. We could look at potentially condensing that down a little bit, but in general, this one I was thinking about more making sure it was consistent with the council vision and the goals that come out of their economic revitalization strategy that they'll be working on.
Okay. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Just want to agree. You get kind of, I mean, it makes its point, but it's probably twice as long as it needs to be. So I hear you on that. I agree. And we'll lose people reading through that one, even though I see the point they're trying to make, but efficient, concise would be great. And we could probably, I'm sure, update it like you said.
Yeah, and I think this is an example of a vision statement that is almost kind of more like a goal or a policy, since it is a lot more detailed and specific. So getting at what is the community value or vision that is kind of trying to describe. So.
This is Commissioner Curd. I also want to just reflect a little bit on Statement 10, some of the verbiage that's used, sustainable and environmentally sound. I feel like maybe connotations of words have changed over time, and this is why it's good to take a look at these every once in a while, because to me, sustainable and environmentally sound are like the same thing. But maybe in the 90s, that wasn't the case. Sustainable, when you're talking about businesses, might be interpreted a lot differently than it is today. So it's just something I noticed.
All right, so for 11, this one is, I think, the only one we have that relates to historic preservation. Staff feedback was, it felt a little overly specific. We do have some prior statements about maintaining residential neighborhoods and neighborhood identity that could be tied to goals and policies in the historic preservation element, which we are looking at taking a bit more of a programmatic approach than we currently have, kind of trying to actually prioritize which areas do we really care about the most. Otherwise, I think the statement could be a little bit more intentional, and it doesn't really refer to the history prior to basically the lumber industry coming in. It doesn't refer to the indigenous population. And then Perhaps there's some revisions to this that could come out of the Telling Bothell's Full Story project, where maybe we're getting more at the intent of what it means to honor the past and how that might provide a perspective for the future.
Commissioner Anders, we talk about providing a perspective for the future, which I think is great, but when we get to the by part, it's all about the past. So we need to create a link somehow between honoring the past and what we're actually going to do to provide a perspective for the future.
All right, I can move on. The next two, 12 and 13, are two more related to the natural environment. So I think I have the same staff feedback about consolidation. So we have protects, preserves, and enhances those features of the natural environment which are most sensitive to human activities, and also promotes protection of native wildlife habitats, recognizing that the human species is but one of many within the Bothell area.
A lot of support for consolidation.
Great. The next one is relating to recreation opportunities, referring to recreation programs. That was one of the things added since '91, and maintaining our parks and open spaces and interlinking trails. Staff feedback would be, I think it feels a little overly specific, more kind of almost like a policy. We could wrap this into a more broad statement about human services, human wellness and happiness, and the resources we provide that we talked about a little bit before.
Bird watching.
I'm not entirely positive.
I think it's things like walking, bird watching, experiencing nature, not necessarily like soccer or golf or something like that. I think it's more of just kind of experiencing the outdoors versus doing a planned activity or sport. Yeah. So maybe a note to use terminology that's commonly understood.
Yes.
Yes, because my husband thinks that walking is not exercise, and I beg to differ. So I think that is active. I count it as active, so I think other people might count it too.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I just wanted to maybe get a little clarification on, are we, so right now we're specifically looking at what's row 15 here, right? About the diversity of active and passive recreation. That's the one we're looking at? Yeah.
Correct.
And you were thinking about including that in a human services goal, kind of tying that in. I guess I wanted a little more, like, how do you see those two things connected, or how do you picture yourself kind of combining those? Because I guess I'm not really clear on, for example, like culturally sensitive city services versus like maintaining parks and open spaces. Those two seem different to me, but maybe.
Yeah, and those could be
But
kind of
all for combining ideas.
those could be kind of two different buckets of when we talk about things that the city does to help benefit the community. I think of these as sort of enrichment activities, so net positives of what are the things we're offering in terms of open spaces and trails that contribute to a healthy and happy way of life, having access to nature. So we, again, when we're, and this is all up for debate in terms of, what kind of categories do you want? We could have a human services section that talks about things like safety and making sure that some of our response services are culturally sensitive. We could have another section that just talks about what are the things that enrich people's lives in the city. And one of those things being the parks and open spaces and trail connections we have and things like that.
Yeah, I like that idea of having, I mean, we would certainly hope that all of this would be about things to enrich people's lives. But I do like that idea that, and I'm not sure how you would phrase it, but just from my perspective, it does seem to me like sensitive to the needs of the entire community, is, you know, culturally responsive and accessible, is a different thing than providing open spaces, parks, and interlocking trails. And I particularly like, this is maybe just a sidebar, the idea of interlocking trails and being sort of at the crux of activity as being if that's what they originally meant, the original intent of this is that idea of being a transit or recreation hub. That's something that appeals, that I could see as being a very cool thing to include. I think I'm just trying to get staff's perspective on how they see this particular bullet point.
And I think to your point, there's components of it that maybe could go into a different topic. So if you're talking about the interlinking trails, that could be under a theme that talks about transportation access, if we want to think about it that way too. So in terms of thinking about different ways to rethink some of these, if we want to go there, there's options for maybe splitting up some of the things that are in here if we think that they maybe make sense somewhere else too.
So Commissioner Jones, is this section also intended to include the arts and those types of activities? Because I'm not necessarily sure that would be clear either from the term recreation. But if there's another section, I mean, there are 19 of them, maybe there's one further down that includes the arts.
You know, and I'm not, we'll go through it, but nothing's coming to mind that there's anything related to public art. And that's a good point. That could be something that we think about wanting to include into one or more of the categories too.
Well, and I would broaden beyond public art to cultural, excuse me, culture generally, of which public art is a component.
Okay, that's all great. So this is another one related to human services.
Commissioner Robson, do you have your hand up?
Oh.
I do, but I'm monopolizing time, so if there are other commissioners who want to speak, I cede the floor.
I see the rest of us looking forward to your feedback.
Wow, thank you. No, I'm still puzzling through what the original intent of this bullet point was. And to me, it just really sounds like they're trying to preserve open spaces and the trails. The recreation element might even be like secondary to that. Active and passive recreation. So I'm wondering if they're just talking about the preservation of parks and trails, which is certainly very important. But, you know, as we are, as a commission are reflecting on this, it seems like it's not entirely clear nobody's really clear on what this is supposed to mean. And so maybe we just want to take it out and include the other things, the things that we have discussed either in other bullet points or as a new one. Because it does seem like none of us are entirely clear on what they were shooting for with this one. And if they did just mean preserving parks and open spaces, I feel like that can be tied into conservation, environmentalism bullet point somewhere else.
I'll just add, as I'm reading through it, is I'm guessing that they were trying to have a vision statement that related to the parks and open space element and the pros plan. And so it kind of reads like a goal and doesn't really necessarily say what we want the parks or open spaces or trails to be like. And so maybe that's an opportunity to be more specific about a vision for what those experiences are versus just providing a diversity of.
Yeah, and I think that was why my note was that it felt overly specific, which is it didn't really read like a vision statement to me. It read more like a policy or a goal of how we're going to get to a certain point.
So I see nodding heads on that, so.
So for 15, staff feedback was some of the language felt a little bit dated, and that I think we can look at revising some of that per the racial equity toolkit we ultimately adopt. And I just had some examples of some of the language we typically see in more of the more modern plans. So that could just be one we look at with our consultant through the lens of our equity analysis and toolkit, making sure we're using proper terminology.
Comments?
I think that's a good idea, and individuals and families in need is definitely outdated language. But I think the language, some of the language that is used as an example here might be a little bit more exclusive than we want, because when we think about people who need physical access or might need these types of services, they don't necessarily come from historically disadvantaged communities, and we want to include everybody. So.
Other comment? I might look at where it says physically accessible, because there aren't just physical barriers to accessibility. You might even drop that word. I'm not sure if that word limits more than it adds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think generally that statement could be revised quite a bit to make sure that we're being as inclusive as we can be. So I appreciate those comments. The next two, one was the one we discussed a bit at length at the beginning. It was just moved. 16, I didn't have any feedback, although this does feel, again, like a bit overly specific. I think we could probably have a more general line or comment about services rather than getting into a specific list of the types of services.
Comments? You want to?
Yeah, I really want to. This is Commissioner Curd. I just think it's kind of funny that we list natural gas in here and say that it's in a manner that is environmentally responsible. There's just some like interesting, I think, yeah, we need to make it more general.
All right, then skipping over 17 since we talked about it earlier. I had a similar comment on number 18. Talks again about services, municipal services. It is specific to annexation, so as Deputy Director Winchell mentioned earlier, it's likely that this was there to tie into the annexation element. But I, again, don't think that means that we can't wrap that into a more general point about services, or some of those more technical municipal services. And then the last two, I didn't have any specific staff comments on those. These are kind of more of those general statements that feel a bit more like vision statements, particularly the last one, which is sort of a summarization of the prior content. So I would just open those two up to the commissioners to provide feedback on.
Commissioner comments? Commissioner Jones?
Commissioner Jones, all of these statements or segments of statements, sound wonderful, given some of the comments that we said about are they visionary or goals. What in here is distinctive about the city of Bothell? Because I would think that in your vision statement, we want something that's distinctive, that folks read it and say, oh, that's Bothell. That doesn't look like Kenmore's vision statement or Bellevue's vision statement. So what is it that's distinctive? And I'll confess that I get lost, and it's so long that it's easy to get lost and not see the vision.
And I think that's the opportunity we have, is to, through this process, get, I think, closer to what is distinctive and what's going to make this stand out as distinctively Bothell as well. So that's sort of the room we have to work on that.
So Commissioner Jones again, I have a clear conflict of interest here, but I would point out that there aren't many small cities in Washington that have 2 higher ed institutions. And I think that's something that could be seen as a distinctive feature. And again, recognizing the conflict of interest.
Commissioner Westerbeck, I mean, I'll concur absolutely. And yeah, I'm an employee too, so I'm in the tank, right? But it's true. It's I've said for years, and I know the city has a great partnership with Cascadia and UW Bothell, but I've often said we should be doing even more to collaborate with them and knit them into the community, and physically knit them in, like with pathways and bikeways and things like that we would discuss as planning commission. So I do think that's something that we're not going to see. Bellevue, Tacoma, there are only so many places. Each place has a community college, but like you say, a major institution along with the newer community college. It's a big deal. You're right.
Commissioner Robson?
Thank you. I wanted to chime in as not an employee of either higher learning institution, that I also find that to be a unique and beneficial element of the city of Bothell. And just to piggyback a little bit on what Commissioner Westerbeck was saying, he wanted to, how the way that Bothell is connected spiritually and physically by opening those pathways through the trail and more integration with the students and things. I think that that's something that we should really hit on, the trails and the riverways, and how all of that is not just not separated into one little haven of Bothell, but we should try to integrate it throughout the entire city so that we all have access to the really great things in our community.
Other commissioner comments? Yes.
Sarah Gustafson here. First of all, thank you, Senior Planner Matt, for making some really good points about language that needs to be explored or rethought, and thank you for bringing your critical thinking into this. What I would maybe suggest is that we decide right now how many statements we want, perhaps 10, or set ourselves a hard limit, and then try to put things under there and see if that helps us do that combination that we'd all like to see.
I've been secretly hoping for 9. I don't know why, but 9.
I love 9.
Let's not get into a bidding war now. But I think there's a very strong consensus that 19 is too many.
Yes.
I think one of your challenges may be to avoid having the individual statements increase in words as you decrease in numbers. So watch that balance.
Yeah, and I also wanted to speak to Commissioner Jones on the sort of what makes us distinct. I think that could be a really fun exercise through the summer engagement process of just asking people, what do you like the most about Bothell? What is special about it to you? Why do you want to be here? Why did you choose to live here? And that could really help us feed into what we end up drafting for the vision or the guiding principles.
It might also attract people to the finished product to see, what got incorporated into it. I like that idea.
Other comments? Well, I think you've got an interesting, hopefully fun, but definitely challenging activity ahead of you. I would kind of say that 2 concepts in particular, sustainability and equity, have changed a lot since these earlier drafts. And what people mean by those words now, even in a couple of years, is different, let alone going back to the first draft. So just because the words are in there, we may be thinking about a different thing than they did then. So look carefully at that would be my suggestion. Anyone else before we close this item? Well, thank you. I'm sure we'll be hearing much more about this, and we'll look forward to it. And then the engagement should be fun this summer as we
Be a
are out
very
and about.
robust summer. A lot.
All right, thank you. With that, I think we're on to our next agenda item, which is unfinished business. And we did have an ad hoc committee formed at the last meeting to draft a letter. We have a hard copy, but I'm noting one of our commissioners may not have access to it.
I apologize. That's right. I should have sent it. I was sort of last minute.
Do you have an electronic version that we could show?
Yeah, if you give me a minute, I can probably, or maybe you. Thanks. Because I don't have it on my phone, but I have a hard copy. I could probably Dropbox
Okay.
over. But I'm sorry, Commissioner Robson. Thinking about everyone being here, and then
And I looked at,
usually here. It's okay, sorry.
I know, but there's almost always a virtual participant, so.
so while we're working through the details on that, as I indicated, we did have an ad hoc committee formed at the last meeting to draft a statement from the commission to the council on downtown parking management. Commissioners Westerbeck and Anders did work together on this and proposed a draft copy for us.
Commissioner Robson, I just emailed it to you, so if you could check your email.
And if one or both of you would like to kind of walk us through this draft.
This is Commissioner Westerbeck. So I hesitate to read the whole thing because I know you guys can do that on your own, and it sounds like I'm proposing this idea that we can talk about the principles in the letter, and then although it's an ad hoc committee, I would want to get your feedback if there are elements we think we missed or it's written in a way that you would like to change. I think we're open to editing, heavy editing if necessary, or even starting from scratch if you preferred. But I tried to sort of, or I should say we, sorry, it's very much a combination of us editing together. I was thinking about Commissioner Jones, and she said, you know, why are people coming here, and why do we have this, you know, perception of parking problems? So setting the stage, as it were. Why are people coming? We have these wonderful traditions, the 4th of July parade, Sarah's markets that everyone's enjoying, the summer series, and that we're attracting people. And we have almost a 20-year-old plan now to grow the downtown, and we're seeing that come to fruition in the last decade or so, especially. And so it's bringing people here. They want to be here, and then so we characterize it as Bothell's having a moment. And then we get into people come here. A lot of people come here in their cars, and they have this perception that there's a parking issue. But we've known for years that going back to 2016-17, when council was initiating some parking studies, and there was some discussion. I remember going to council meetings that they discussed quantifying the parking and how to use it best, how to manage it, and if we could afford parking management then. And it was tabled because they said it costs more than it would bring in. But now we're thinking about it sort of as a, in this letter, is it our sort of responsibility as a community to manage this resource to continue the prosperity of the city of Bothell and continue to help people come here so they can enjoy themselves and spend money, and it's a community service for our own residents as well as visitors. So that idea, and then sort of just getting into, there's an enormous amount of value in the public parking resource in the city of Bothell, and it literally has a dollar value. And as a city, are we stewarding that well? I live just a couple blocks away. There's a car with an orange sticker on it, so they did finally ticket this car. It's been there for almost 3 weeks. There's literally leaves and dirt and stuff and this happens all the time on my street, 183rd. So, those are some of the, without reading it, some of the issues we wanted to get into. But Commissioner Anders, maybe you want to speak to some elements that you thought were important?
Just one that I would add is that parking can be an impediment to growth. And what we hear all the time from community members, and I think we even heard it from me early on, is just a concern about the growth that we're seeing and where people are going to park. And if we're going to relieve some of the parking requirements for construction, we want to assure people that, yes, there's adequate parking if it's just managed appropriately. So just to think about parking, not just as, managing it as a revenue stream, but to eliminate impediments to the growth that we're trying to see in Bothell.
Yeah, see it as a resource that should be shared and husbanded as an old-fashioned word I know, but used responsibly so that, I've referenced last week Donald Shoup, the parking guru, and in his whole thing in his long book, he's got those 3 tenets, but one of the things he emphasizes over and over is when you manage parking, there should always be about 15% minimum available so that someone can find a spot. They don't have to circle all day long. Whether that requires, paid or permit or whatever, we might not need to get into permits and so forth, but, and then there's a concern about, people moving to apartments, and they don't want to pay for the spot, or there wasn't one available. So how can we make sure that when someone does come and they want to enjoy our city, they don't have that anxiety that Commissioner Anders spoke of, and it's in the letter as well, that they know that it might be a little full, but they'll find something so they can come enjoy the city as well.
So, Commissioner, comments on this? This is important. We've all, or I think all of us, have spoken to it at one time or another. On the other hand, there's not a time-critical date. There's not a deadline on it. So, I guess our choices are address it, address it at this meeting, and complete it. Or if folks want to take the time to read. I think Commissioner Westerbeck is probably correct. The wordsmithing at all might be a little challenging. So we could come back on the next meeting, which would be May 17th. Is there a sense of the commission which way you'd like to go? Either power through it tonight or review it? Commissioner Gustafson and then Commissioner Anders.
It's Sarah Gustafson here. I'd like to do it tonight. We're excited about this. This is good stuff.
Okay. All right. So everyone has a copy. Why don't we just take a moment then, and folks can review it, and then if there are specific changes folks want to make, we can do that, and then talk about next steps. So let me know when you'd like to start discussion. Commissioner Gustafson?
Sarah Gustafson here, and lots of gratitude towards Commissioner Anders and Commissioner Westerbeck for putting together a letter that is very clear and colorful, and I think will evoke a lot of sympathy from the people who hear it, because it reflects the frustration that we've heard from a lot of people. I really appreciate that going through. One thing that I might add is a sentence saying something along the lines of, we call for this policy to be compassionate towards people who live in their vehicles and thoughtful about the risks of disproportionate enforcement by race, income, or neighborhood. But I do like the fact that we are looking at policies outside of the city and bringing in those named examples of different policies, and it shows that this is a approach that's worked before and should work in Bothell as well. So I'm really excited, and thank you.
I appreciate that because I live and even interact for years now with folks who live in their cars near me, and so I hear that loud and clear. Thanks for that point.
Other comments? Commissioner Curd?
Yeah, thanks. This is a great letter. Thanks for taking the time to put this together. Everything resonates really, really loudly and clearly. I really appreciate that you have taken things from public comment and literally put them into the letter, which is just awesome. That's one way that we can listen and reflect on people who take the time to come and talk to us. One of the things that I'm wondering about is the previous consultant work. I don't know the outcome of that, and so I'm a little unclear. But when we talk about enforcement and management being it's a value, right? It's something that we value the space as a resource, but we don't want to reduce it down to just a cost transactional sort of thing, where there are many soft benefits of parking management as well. And so I don't know necessarily where that would get worked in, but maybe at the end, just mentioning something about how this is bigger than just a monetary expense, but that it's something that can provide benefits that touch on a lot of different council priorities as well. So something that gets at the value rather than just the cost.
Okay, other commissioner comments? So thoughts on how to, Commissioner Robson. Oops, there you go.
Sorry. Yeah. I don't know how much wordsmithing we can do as a committee, but I was just wondering, have you guys read this aloud and seen
How long?
if it reads within the right amount of time?
I did a couple times.
Okay.
It's about 3, maybe just a little over 3. And to that, I have to wonder if this is important enough, and we're planning commission. Do we get maybe a tiny slice, 5 minutes of a meeting one night, not just have to do public comment, or are we just public commenters? Like the chair is allowed to brief the commission.
I don't know
I don't
the
think
answer
we
to
wanted-
that off the top of my head.
Yeah, they did have something feedback from commissions, but then I understood they kind of redefined what that meant. Commissioner Robson?
I don't know if we'd want to go over 5 minutes, like if we'd want to go over much over 3 minutes. Anyway, I know that
Yeah.
that's about the amount of time that anybody God bless city council and everything. 5 minutes is, of
Well,
straight talk can be hard without a response.
To be
so.
clear, I don't think this should be more than about what it is now. I think being concise is actually really important. But I'm just saying, like, if they said there's an AB, whatever, in the council meeting, and like, it's going to take about 5 minutes, and they might have that 5 minutes includes them asking a question or two or discussing it. But I agree, ours should stay around that. But I don't necessarily think that planning commission should be buzzed at 3 minutes if we go to 3:20. That's all.
And along those lines, I just wanted to, if you do need some wordsmithing, I do think that there are a few places where the language can be tightened.
Absolutely.
And just kind of, it's my technical writer sense is tingling. If that's, I don't know what kind of changes, I don't know how that we would proceed. Like, do we approve it with changes, or? I don't know how we're going to proceed from here. So that's just my thought on it. If you need help wordsmithing, I think you could probably use some typing.
I heard two concepts to be added from Commissioners Gustafson and Commissioner Curd, so we want to address that.
Yeah, I don't know that we're ready to approve anything yet. I think particularly I feel like we did touch on the value and the cost, but we didn't bring it out quite as strong. And in doing that, we might end up cutting down some of the language anyway, because we probably have softly said it a couple of times, but if we put it right out there, we don't need to use so many words probably.
I agree. I can't speak for Commissioner Anders, but I tend to be wordy at first, and then I have to cut. So this was not intended to be a final draft in that respect, but make sure we get the very good ideas I'm hearing so far into the letter, so that we hit the points that we as a planning commission have been talking about for a couple of years and integrate those in, get your thoughts. So, agreed.
Looking at our bylaws for a minute, and the reason I'm looking for them is I believe ad hoc committees can have an additional member. You can't have a quorum, but okay, not to exceed 3 minutes. So Article 9 of our bylaw says we can have, and where I'm going, Commissioner Robson, is perhaps you'd want to assist in revising a draft for adoption at the next meeting, because we can have 3 members on an ad hoc committee. Are you interested?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to help, and in any way I can. That'd be fine.
Okay. So, Deputy Director?
Gustafson has been trying to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director Winchell. I do wonder if we might be able to have both of the commissioners who wrote the letter give the presentation, and perhaps this could help us get around the time limit, but if not, I think it would be really good to maybe break it out, have one commissioner read the first few paragraphs and the second commissioner say, okay, now that we've defined the problem, here's the solution. And I think the change of person in the middle of this would just really wake council up and say, hey, there are 2 people here. This is really important.
Yeah, we can certainly do that if the committee members are interested in making the presentation. But to get to there, we need to finalize it up. So I'm kind of hearing an interest in some editing, adding the 2 concepts that were discussed, and then bringing it back at the next meeting.
I want a point of clarification. It sounds like the bylaws do say we do need to keep it at 3 minutes. Is that correct?
No, I was looking at the bylaws for the Planning Commission, which indicates an ad hoc committee could have
3 members.
I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse.
That's all right. So I'm open to the 3rd member. I would welcome Commissioner Robson's editing, but I do not want to speak for Commissioner Anders.
I agree.
So I'm not sure. You looking, Deputy Director Winchell, you looking like,
I was just going to add that if you all send us a letter the Wednesday prior to Planning Commission, we could at least put it in the packet so everyone has a chance to read it before the meeting.
so I'm not sure, but what I'm struggling with is, do we need a motion for this? Or should we just proceed? What we're discussing is an action where we'd add a member to the ad hoc committee. You would receive the comments that we made at this meeting, revise it, and then bring it back to the May 17th meeting for adoption and submittal to council. Yeah, there was a motion that formed the committee, so.
So moved.
All right, so I think there is a motion to add a member to the committee, edit the letter, and bring it back.
Seconded.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right. I'm sorry, I'm an old bureaucrat, and process will get you if you miss it sometimes. So, all right. Well, thank you for your hard work on that. I think it was a good discussion on the commission. It's an issue that we're all interested in, so look forward to bringing it to conclusion. Thank you all. So with that, is there any other unfinished business?
No.
Thank you. Then we move on to reports from staff.
I'll be quick. Just wanted to get a few things on your radar. Unfortunately, I don't have the House bill or Senate bill numbers, but some things that we've been paying attention to that have passed out of the House and are now waiting for the governor's signature. Middle housing has passed. I do know that's HB 1110. There's another one that's passed that included some SEPA exemptions in it. So pretty much if you do an EIS for your comprehensive plan that anticipates the growth and the zoning, then you can exempt a lot of projects from SEPA, which is a really exciting thing for a lot of our development services planners. And then there was also a bill which added a climate change element to the comprehensive plans. So thankfully, we already have some middle housing started. We're waiting to see what actually gets signed by the governor, and then we'll be creating a matrix to kind of understand what's required by the state, what did Planning Commission recommend to City Council, what's in our code, and what may we need to change to comply with state law. And then we're well on our way to have a climate change element. So we'll be paying attention to what some of those requirements are so that we can comply as much as possible before we adopt. And then we'll be paying attention to SEPA exemptions, which those seem like they'll come after our comprehensive plan. The last thing I'll add is we are having the Middle Housing Community Forum on May 3rd. Sorry, we canceled Planning Commission for that, but it ended up being the best night for council members and other folks. And so thanks for being flexible, but that will be in this room from 6 to 8 p.m. We'll have a presentation on what is middle housing and what's being proposed. I think some of the tone of that meeting will change with the new legislation passing, because it's a little bit less of will we pass middle housing to how will we comply with state law. And then we're planning on having small facilitated conversations with folks about middle housing. We really want community members to hear from each other and learn about what their neighbors may be interested in, and have more of an open dialogue between folks who may be on different sides of the table, and then provide feedback that way. The survey, we also will have an online survey. We'll have paper surveys available at the meeting, but it'll launch the same day as the forum, and it'll be open for 2 weeks. We just finalized the flyer that's going out to all addresses, or residential addresses in Bothell, so we'll forward that on to you all so you have a copy of it. It's two-sided. One side's about middle housing, one side's about a pedestrian survey that's coming out. So probably 2 surveys and things that'll be interest of Planning Commission. So please make sure to let your neighbors know and let people know how they can be involved, so that in case the mail doesn't make it to them, or they see something from the city and throw it away, that they know was important and should participate. So we'll be sharing more with you all as it's available.
All right, thank you. So reports from members. Commissioner Gustafson?
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. Last Thursday, the 13th, there was another middle housing walk that started at City Hall and went through Lower Maywood, and I have not been on one of these walks for about a year. I think it was really successful. Deputy Director Winchell was there, Director Greenspan was there, Senior Planner Boyd led the presentation and the walk. The first takeaway that I had from this walk is that people really, really enjoy it. There were requests for even more walks and perhaps taking this concept to different cities because people are curious what's going on in Finn Hill or Shoreline or any other place that might have missing middle. And I think this is basically the legacy of Commissioner Curd and BOPOP bringing this forward. It has been probably the best, or one of the best educational tools about middle housing here. Let's see, there was a lot of talk and explanation from Senior Planner Boyd about what the houses will look like, a lot of questions about what the housing might look like, questions about alleyway versus front door entrances, and it was pretty fun to see people actually coming out of their houses and talking to us and saying, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, okay, interesting." And I think one question that did come up that I feel needs to be addressed at every single public meeting is the distinction between the 5-story potential of the downtown transition zone units and the overall middle housing. Somebody came in with a picture and said, "Is this related to the 5-story building?" And then we talked about it and we introduced a bit about the Drews, and then one person said that, "Okay, I'll send back my 5-story sign because I don't think I need that sign anymore." So it was a bit of a joke, but I think that shows that there's a lot of interest in learning more about those as separate items. So it was really great to hear community and people taking the time to come out and share their thoughts, and it was very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you. Other reports from members? Commissioner Westerbeck?
I'll just add to Commissioner Gustafson. I was at an event this morning where there was a Kirkland council member, and she had heard about the origins of the walk with BOPOP, and she said she wanted to talk with some of us about creating one in Kirkland. So there is demand for doing that in other cities because they realize it's a powerful tool. So you're right, the word's spreading. It's kind of fun.
Well, and I think from a public involvement standpoint, it is effective to get people out, sitting behind this podium, up here, and have people being out there is different from being out walking and conversational. And I think it's a use, when the tool can be used, I think it's a very powerful tool. Other members? There's a transit meeting, right? The 25th? I believe there's a meeting.
There's a not community transit, sound transit meeting, a sound transit community meeting on April 25th at the downtown library. And I believe the information for that's available on Sound Transit's website with exact times.
Okay. With BRT coming to town, they'll be getting some feedback on that, so. All right. And any other reports from members? Seeing none, we worked on our item to report to council under unfinished business. So looking around, seeing no further business, is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Westerbeck.
No one else is doing it, so it's Commissioner Westerbeck. A motion to adjourn the meeting.
There a second? Commissioner Gustafson.
I second the motion. Thank you.
All right, it's been moved and second to adjourn the meeting. The meeting is adjourned at 8:01. Our next meeting will be May 17th. As indicated earlier, our previously scheduled May 3rd meeting has been canceled, and I believe we have a rescheduled date, right? The 24th?
May 24th.
So the previously scheduled, well, in replacing the canceled meeting, there'll be a May 24th meeting. So we'll see you all then. Have a good evening.